Bob, can you hear us?
Yes, I can.
Do you want to?
I think we can start. I'm going to call to order the meeting of the workshop for January the 18th of the Highlands Town Board. The first item would be to review and approve the agenda. Do we have any changes, additions to the agenda?
Move it be approved.
Second. All in favor, please raise your hands. Signify by saying aye. Thank you very much. So we have an agenda. The next item would be the approval of the November 16th work session meeting minutes. Do we have any changes to those minutes or clarifications?
Motion to approve.
All right. All in favor, please raise your hand. Signify by saying yeah. And Commissioner Weller, you were not a commissioner at that
I was
time.
not.
Okay, thank you. Now, our next item will be discussion items. And let me just start, I'm getting to where I think this workshop format's really very functional because we all get a chance to talk about these critical issues. And the first item that we want to discuss tonight is the water treatment plant upgrade discussion. Now I'll ask our Public Works Director, Lamar Nix, who's been managing this whole process, to come up and give us a briefing and talk to us about what our options are ahead of this project.
If y'all recall last year to retreat, we talked about replacing a tank and a pump station at the water treatment plant. And we put it in the budget for this fiscal year to do the engineering and design work to replace that tank and that pump station. So we hired W.K. Dixon to begin that process. And we met numerous times, throwing ideas around about the best way to go about it to get the most out of our money. And during that conversation, we decided to downsize the tank. That existing tank was actually a leftover from the original plant construction in 1965. And we repurposed it for this intermediate pump station and tank between the pre-clarifier, a big tank, and the water plant. That the only reason that we had a 100,000 gallon tank was not because we needed it, it's just because it's already there. We repurposed it. So to replace it, we decided to downsize it, obviously to save money, and put some money into quality as well. In the pre-clarifier, you add pre-treatment chemicals, alum, caustic, to start a flocculant in the water. And it settles to the bottom of the tank and has sweeps that sweeps it to a center and ultimately down to a waste tank. And sometimes, due to the nature of our water and our soils and highlands, some of this flock is so light, it stays on top and gets down into this intermediate pump station, storage tank, and so forth, where it is pumped up into the filter room. So ultimately, you get some of that into the top of the filters. So when we started looking at this project, I wanted to downsize the tank, put some of that size money basically into a baffling system to try to catch that sediment before it gets into the plant. So having said all that, we were deep into this process when we learned that there was a possibility that the town might receive some grant money for some work at the water plant. So we had that in the back of our mind the whole time. And when it seemed that it was going to be a reality, I contacted Dixon. I said, we might need to rescope just a little bit. We can't officially do it, but let's put some thought into how we can get the best out of this grant money. And the other portion of this project is a result of that. And that's to go ahead and put the third filter unit inside the plant. When the plant was rebuilt in 1995, 96. It was built with 2 filter units and enough space in the building to slide the 3rd unit in at a later date as needed. So the wall has a knockout area that you can remove. You remove some plumbing, you slide the units in, you pour footers, you set the units in, and you construct the units, basically inside out. So that was the thought. Let's go ahead and do this now while we have the availability of the funds to, pretty well pay for this thing. So during the scoping, they looked into that, reached out to vendors, did all the measurements, things necessary it took to get a good opinion of probable cost to incorporate that into this project. And that's what you have in front of you. And why would we need the 3rd filter train? About 6 years ago, Josh, we had a filter failure.
I don't think it was 6, was it?
It was 5 to 6,
Yeah,
somewhere in
I
there.
don't think it was that long ago, was it? Maybe it was.
Anyway, it puts you on pins and needles.
Yeah, because we only
Because
had
both-
one.
Both filters are the same exact age. They run exactly to the second, the same amount of time. And when one goes, that means the other one's almost going to. So we got that one rebuilt. And it was like 2 months later, the other one started to fail. So we're sitting here with 2 filter units that are aging identically. And when one goes, you're on edge. From a maintenance perspective and an operational perspective, I think it's time to go ahead and let's try to get this 3rd filter in here. And it's quite offset in aging of the other 2. And you can filter the same amount of water at a slower rate. Now, having a new baffle system in the tank, catching sediment before it even gets to it, and being able to put it into 3 filters and slow down the filter rate, it will up the quality of your water. And some of the issues that I was sitting here trying to explain to you why we were having to put, notices in the paper and so forth, it will definitely help on those issues. So I think it's a good time to go ahead and do it since we have the opportunity. On the spring, the pre-clarifier tank is the tank to the right. And that's where the water enters the plant from either the creek or the Big Creek arm of the lake or at the new intake down at the dam. Everything comes in to that point. From there, the tank.
And that we don't have yet.
It's there. It's existing.
Oh,
The
it's
old
existing. The old one.
That's, no, it's the pre-clarifier.
Oh, okay.
It's
got it.
about a 1996 model. Let's say. Water enters that, flows by gravity over to the tank to the left, and that's the aged tank that we need to replace. The proposal is to build the new tank. That's that rectangular area you see in the middle. That's a 40,000 gallon tank with a baffling system and a pump station to pump the water back into the plant. To do this construction, you can leave everything in operation during construction, and when it's finished, you open and close valves and you fire up the new tank and the pump station. So it doesn't interrupt the operation of the plant at all. The filter, which I don't have any drawings or anything on that. Gibby, can you go to the next one? That's a sort of a closer view of the proposed tank. Inside that is a baffling system. If you would just go on to the next one. That's a good representation of what this would look like. What's invisible is the baffling system that goes inside of it that baffles the sediment. But the water will go through this tank and then go into the weir hose into the where the pumps are set before it is pumped up into the plant.
That's what I would call a sagittal section. That's a vertical section.
Yes.
And we can get that depth of a pump in there. Or is that above ground?
No, it's buried.
It's buried.
Would the tank be buried?
Partially on the upper side buried, on the lower side, it would be definitely exposed.
Yeah.
Because
Because we always worry about rock.
Yeah, of course.
So then the original 1960s tank, which is now our using, we're just gonna decommission that entirely?
Yes.
Does that get removed or anything?
I don't even know if they got that in their probable cost or not, but it'll serve no purpose once this is over.
You don't think you'd want to use it like you did the old sewer plant down by the rec park as a backup?
No, it serves no purpose at this point. The concrete on the inside of it, we've re-epoxied it and worked on it for several years. It's really not worth
Gotcha.
using it again. Once we replace it, it's done.
Okay.
But that is my recommendation is when you do this, I would incorporate both these as one project. And the grant is theoretically, I guess, at $5 million. The probable cost of this is 6.7. And the reason we're talking about this now, Josh, you correct me when I'm wrong, but I think you're expecting a letter at some point in the near future. And you have a time to respond as to how you're going to spend the money. You know, exactly what it's going to be, what things are going to cost. So Josh has to be prepared to, and he has to do that in a certain amount of time. So he has to be prepared to say, here's what we're doing, here's what it's going to cost. And that starts the process, which is, as we've learned with Dog Mountain, it's a lengthy process.
And let me say this, I've been waiting for the letter. The letters, we've been waiting because with that letter, it probably would have the conditions, the requirements, things that we need to know before we proceed, especially, is this grant just for the clarifier or is it just overall water plant improvement, initiatives? So we're waiting for that. And I will just tell you, if I don't get it by the end of January, I'm going to pick up the telephone and say, oh, are we missing something here? We need the letter. I think I know what's happened. They've had so many, these projects and everything with that big omnibus spending budget that the people that have to sit there and crank out the letters and the requirements, they're probably working all the time trying to get all of these out to all the different people that receive grants. So I understand that it's going to take maybe some time, but I don't want to be left out. So the deal here that we're talking about is, if we have 5 million, we'd have to allocate more money to put in that filter train. But we have been talking for the last several years, the need of that filter train. Really, Amy, I think from the problems we had with repairing the existing one, we started talking about this. So,
well, and we've talked for, I don't know, 30 years about how pure our water is, but how many fines there are in there. We've always had a flocculation problem with the really fine stuff, that it's almost like we have too pure water. We don't have enough gunk in our water to actually flocculate out very well.
That's exactly correct.
And so if we can do that, it seems to me that's part of a pre-clarifier condition anyway.
It is, and being able to slow that filter rate down it's all a very good thing.
The other day, I asked Lamar, and Lamar was kind enough to take me on a tour of the water treatment plant. If you haven't done it, I assume everybody has, but if you haven't done it, it's very enlightening. It's actually a lot more complicated than I ever imagined, and a lot more pieces and parts and pumps and everything else. But Lamar explained to me about some of these things, and I mean, with the pre-clarifier you've been talking about, now the grant is for that, obviously, but I definitely would be in favor of, if we can use that grant money in moving ahead with more exploration about the third train. Because that, I mean, basically, in your words, if one train goes down while it's being serviced, if the other one goes down, water ceases.
We'll be standing at the red light.
Right, and that's to every person in town. There is no water coming to your house, so it's kind of a no-brainer. It's a heck of a lot of money, but if we can use it, and hopefully we can.
And it sets you up for down the road when you need to go from a 2 MGD plant to a 3 MGD plant. You're already there with that portion. And of course, The pumps inside this intermediate pump station, they're going to be sized for 3 MGD. So that portion's already done. But they're variable speed.
Yeah, let me just ask you, is 3 MGD realistic when in the last 7 years, we've had 2 terms when we've had to have water restrictions? I mean, we only have what falls out of the sky in our watershed, and we're on the top. So I don't know that we're ever going to get that extra million MGD.
If we were dependent solely on Big Creek, no. We
That's what I
wouldn't even
mean,
get
but
to it.
we still have,
But we're not solely dependent. And we have Colasage River. We also have the Satula branch, I guess you call it, as tributaries to the lake. I don't see 3 MGD being a serious issue.
well.
If you were just talking about the creek of Big Creek.
Oh, I
yes,
understand that.
you
And
would
we've
do.
moved that intake down there to Square for that very reason, because we knew we were never going to be able to get enough out of just Big Creek. But that's our last, we can't move anything anywhere else. That's our last one. And if you saw the water coming over that dam in this last
I
2
saw
months ago.
Every day.
Yeah, I know. I'm sure you were going over down there seeing if it was even enough to go over that thing. That's what I'm saying. In the last 7 years, we've had 2 episodes of that. And that's it, whatever the 2 million, whatever we're pumping now. I'm just wondering if we're ever realistically going to be able to go to 3 MGD.
I think given the drought we just had, I think it would handle 3 MGD because we're already running at 2, even though we're permitted at 1.77. You run at that rate, it's just a rate. And yeah, I think it's realistic that you could. I don't think we'd ever go beyond that. And then another thing with the master water assessment that we had done in 2018 and then reconfirmed a couple of years later just to be eligible for a grant. We're out about 20 years of growth to get to that 3 MGD. But we can plan what we're doing now infrastructurally so that if that time comes, we're not having to do everything at once. And we're already there with the lake intakes. They're variable flow and they'll get up there. And we're going to do these pumps the same way so that down the road, it's already there. Because when you change stuff like that, it's not just, oh, let's change the impeller on this or that. It's a total electrical change. So you want to do it right the first time.
Well, I'm not saying we shouldn't do it. I'm just questioning whether we're ever going to be able to actually supply 3 MGD, year round here.
In 20 years, we could better answer that, I think.
Yeah, because we may have a totally different rainfall and dry seasons and everything else. And the fact is we have now sewered all the way around Sequoia, and that honestly, septic tank groundwater flows, and that is actually a flow that we no longer have. It comes in and goes out below the dam as opposed to above the dam.
We'll have to turn the pipe.
In that hydrologic cycling.
We'll have to turn the pipe.
Yeah, but I don't know that they'll let us do that for a Class 1 reservoir. Anyway, okay.
So I think,
I agree with Jeff. I think if we're going to do it, we got to go ahead and do it now with the thought of the future and keeping ourselves from running into sitting on pins and needles last time when we were worried about that second filter going out before we got the first one fixed. And since they're both the same age, although I'm not sure that's always real consistent that they go out at the same time, but it's probably more probable than not, but not necessarily true. So we didn't know we were going to get this grant anyway.
Yeah.
We were going to have to pay for it anyway.
Well, and we originally thought it would be more toward $5 million, and that's the reason the mayor requested $5 million. And we haven't seen the paperwork on that. I don't know exactly how it's going to be listed on there. We think it may be water plant improvements or water improvements. So that's what we need to know is when we do get that notification, there's probably going to be a small questionnaire. What's the project? What's the cost? And all that we're going to have to fill out and send back in, pretty soon once we get that. And then they'll tell us if they're going to approve us to go forward with that or not. So hopefully they would allow us to do both, but they may not. But that's why we brought it to you guys now, as soon as we got the quotes on it, so that, you know, we would know what to tell the state. And it's going to take a while for them to probably answer us back. So we needed that. And two, I just want to go back to the overall cost is almost 6.7 million. And
This
that's
is a
probable
good point.
cost.
Listen,
That's probable
That's what you
cost
said.
today. So when we spend this money, it's probably going to be 2 years from now, a good 2 years from now. We don't know what those costs will be. It could easily be, you know, 7.5 million, the way things are going right now. So we would, at this point, we would have to borrow somewhere around 1.7 million. You know, it might be, you know, 2.5 million by the time we get around to actually doing it. So it would require a loan. We would hopefully go through the state revolving fund to get a low interest loan. We'll have to explore that if the state allows us to proceed forward with it. But that's what we're looking at. But like you said, we were going to have to pay for this project what we thought was $5 million ourselves, because we had kind of expired every avenue that we had on applying for grants. So if we had to spend $2 million, you know, to basically accomplish two of the top priorities on our list, I think it'd be well worth it.
And what I'm hearing the board saying, this is why we wanted this discussion. I think everybody's in agreement to tell Lamar, just continue planning for this third filter train. And we'll get the clarification in the letter on that. But what I think everybody's saying is, now that we're updated, know what kind of money we're talking about, we should continue with the process.
Correct. So Mayor, you're going to have to get on the horn and find out where our letters are at.
Yeah, I know. Don't want to be
Before we
pushy,
give it to
but
somebody else.
yeah, okay, fine. Thank you, Lamar.
So,
Appreciate it.
wait, one more thing. So the new engineering, is that covered in this fiscal year's budget?
No, it's not. They were already working for us as budgeted.
Yeah, but that was for
on
a
the tank.
different,
And we were fortunate to get them to look a little deeper for us and contact vendors and contractors. And I think they did an excellent job of putting together a probable cost. And I don't have any drawings to show you of the filter train because they haven't done it. Gibby, can you go up to those pictures I took?
so what I'm saying is are we gonna have to do a budget amendment in this year to pay for the extra engineering that's going on to change this project?
Well, that I can't answer. I think it depends on when you hear back from the state and when we would actually start having to
Yes.
do RFPs and all that, because that's where we'll go.
So we need a new
Full-
RFP,
I don't-
not use WK Dixon?
We choose who we have to use, but I think we'll most likely have to do the same process they would do with Dog Mountain. You have to go through this process of
Okay.
RFPs, pick one and move forward.
So we do RFQs in order to determine who then negotiate a
Yes.
proposal.
That's where the filter train goes.
And one is right next to it. The blue wall is in the one that's already in there.
You can go to the next picture.
Yeah, there you go.
That's looking beside one, and then the next picture is actually looking
On top.
down on top of it.
Okay.
But Amy, we've already paid to get the design and the permits on the tank and the pump station, but I'm not sure right now that we would actually start then to do any design work and permitting for the
Do we know?
filter project until you know more about it.
Okay,
Okay.
but that probably would need if we do that, that's something we haven't budgeted for this year,
That's
depending on
correct.
when, if
That's
it
correct. We have
occurs in
not
this fiscal,
budgeted.
in the next 6 months, or if it occurs 8 months from now.
That's correct.
Okay. Thank you, Lamar. You know, in hours, you can go through, spend a lot of time on just one thing, just in an hour, but let me move on here. The next item would be planning board appointment policy review. This is not to be confused. We consulted with our town attorney and went through a process of nomination to select the members of the planning board and the zoning board of adjustment. But now we're talking about a policy about appointments. How long should those appointments be and so forth? Josh, would you like to weigh in on your perspective on this, the questions we need to address?
Well, the main point here is there are some questions asked about the requirements for the planning board appointments. There is a detailed description of the zoning board, who can be outside the city limits, and then where they have to live, which is in the Highlands Township. It doesn't say that for the planning board. So there's not a detailed description for that. It says that the majority have to live inside the city limits. And it doesn't say the Highlands Township. It doesn't say specifics of, like the zoning board also says, you must own a business or own property within the town. So we felt like with the questions being answered or asked and us looking at it, that we probably need to be consistent with both boards.
Yeah, all
Michael?
I would add to what he's saying is, as it reads right now for the policy, is the town policy requires that a majority of the members of the planning board shall reside within the corporate limits of the town. And adding something like, the policy requires that all planning board members shall reside in the Highlands Township, with a majority of those members residing within the corporate limits.
And let me add one thing. Having the majority of people being residents within the town, I think is good. On the other hand, because if people live in the township, sometimes we like to make those distinctions, but they can bring in perspectives too. So I think having a balance of people that live in the town and then some people in the township is what we're striving for. Anybody outside the township though, no.
Yeah, and Gibby could even attest to this, that we've received 2 applications. One was for Scaly, I believe she said, and one was from Cullowhee, wanting to serve on the planning board.
Colby.
I believe so.
Yeah,
Is
we
that correct?
got one that
Yeah.
said Coley.
Yeah.
Can you read the details for the zoning board? How they differ?
So the zoning board of adjustment membership shall consist of a minimum of 5 members who reside within the corporate limits of the town, and 2 members who reside outside of the corporate limits, but who own property or a business within the corporate limits. The members shall also reside within the Highlands Township.
So I guess my question was, does that mean that some of them have to be outside of town?
For the zoning or the planning?
The zoning, that what you just read?
Let's see.
It sounds like they
The
have.
shall sounds like it has to
Well,
be.
it sounded
Yeah.
like,
It does, because it says 2 of them have, or
Like
reside
they can
outside the
from
corporate
outside,
limits.
Don't have to be from outside.
what's the
That should
may,
be-
can, shall,
So it
could?
said, shall consist of a minimum of 5 members who reside within the corporate limits of the town, and 2 members who reside outside the
It
corporate
shall.
limits of the town.
Or
But,
may?
but on the property or a business in the
I like
corporate
may
limits.
or-
You need to just put in there, or 2 members may be outside
Yeah.
the corporate limits.
If you couldn't find, yeah.
Because where it read to me right now is you had to have 2 of them that were outside.
Yeah.
Isn't that right?
That's how I took it, yeah.
I thought it was too. And now when I heard this one, I thought, oh my gosh, did we change it to where they had to be outside?
And the other question is, that's for the zoning board, right? Michael?
Yeah. Yeah, those. are the
Would we
zoning board.
want to use the same criteria for forming the planning board too?
I would think so. And I think, I mean, you can get good people outside, but if you don't have the good people outside, then you have to find them somewhere.
Yeah.
I think that the other thing is I think a lot of the planning board, it's based on the premise that you have to live under the rules that you're making. In other words, you're not making rules that you don't have to live under.
Good point.
Hey, Mayor. Can
Yes.
you hear me, Mayor?
Yes,
Um,
go ahead.
Quick question, and I just don't know the answer. Does the town have extraterritorial jurisdiction?
No, we do not. We used to.
Okay,
That's where the outside came in.
Yeah.
okay, because if you did, there's some statutory requirements, but not having it, you have flexibility.
Right.
Okay.
I think that's why we initially have 2 to be of the zoning board to be outside because we had extraterritorial
Mhm.
jurisdictions and we never changed it back.
Okay.
But that was the reason is because you're supposed to live under the rules that you're trying to make.
So Bob, what you're saying, since we don't have ETJ, we have options on how we can craft this requirement
For either one of them.
for either one of them.
Yeah, I think that's correct. If you had ETJ, there's a mandatory representation from outside the corporate limits.
Correct.
And it also gives a role for the Board of Commissioners, the county commissioners, to make those appointments. But since you don't have an ETJ, you really have flexibility. You could limit it to residents of the town. Certainly you can do what's being described, or certainly anything else.
I kind of like, I think that the concept of having the 5 that have to be inside the city limits and 2 that can be
Yeah,
or
could.
may be on there, I think it's still valid if they own a business and or property, because it still makes sense for, but I think it should be for both boards.
Yeah.
And I don't want to get off on a tangent too far, but one question I have is, the zoning board terms are how long? 3 years?
Is it 3 years, Gibby?
It's a 3-year
3 year.
term with a maximum of 2 terms?
Yeah. And I was about to bring that up in the intro. Yeah.
Yeah.
I know
Okay.
what you're driving at.
Well, I
Go
mean,
ahead.
it seems odd to me that the planning board is everybody's new every year. Not new,
Just
but everybody
reappointed.
gets reappointed. I think that also should follow suit with the zoning board rather, because there's potential for having 0 continuity for something everybody was working on. And then all of a sudden you get we had a great turnout this time. So there's only 4 returning, which is great. But if you didn't have returning people, you could have 7 new people sitting there talking about subjects that you're starting over every year.
And that's something, I know our chairman, Margot Teed's in here, that's something we've actually discussed for the zoning board, is cutting that limit off, because Bob, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think there's a statutory requirement that says the zoning board members should have to serve a maximum of set years.
No, that's up to your local decision.
So at this point, we've got a good board that's trained up, that's taken classes, read their books. They've had a few hearings with their new attorneys and stuff like that. And for after 3 years, like Margot's term ends at 2025 as it stands right now.
But
And-
just talking about the planning board,
Oh,
Oh, yeah.
putting
Planning board.
terms on the
Right.
planning
Well,
board rather than upping
goes-
every year.
okay. Sorry.
But no, we'll talk about that subject, but I also agree that in a town like this, a small town like this, finding 14 people between 2 boards.
It is
and
tough.
then You kind of, once they've done their term, they're done. So now we got to find, so no, I agree with.
And planning
that.
board is a little bit, easier for someone to come on and get the gist of that. But what I was pushing towards was the zoning board, when you've got those good members that are trained up,
Yeah.
and then you lose them, like your chairman next year. It's hard to find somebody to fill those shoes, and then you got to try to train them. And then all of a sudden, someone comes in for a special use permit, and everybody's chasing their tails during a meeting, trying to figure out what's going on.
And let me give you some long-term history now that I've lived here 24 years. I went on the planning board in, I believe, 2003. And I stayed on it for 6 years. And at the time, you had 3-year terms and you could be reappointed for 2 terms. So I went off after that second term. But then it got to a point where it was hard to get people to participate. And that model went away to where we had some people that stayed on the planning board for much, much longer than that.
And
So
that was the reason.
Hmm?
And that was the reason.
we didn't have enough.
Instead of kicking
participation.
you off just because your term was up.
Yeah.
If we didn't have anybody to replace you, we felt like we needed bodies,
Yeah.
people who would show up to the meetings. And I think that's where that came from, Jeff. And I agree that there's something to be said for terms,
Mhm.
particularly staggered terms.
Mhm.
But I think that's why it is the way it is, because originally it was not this way.
Right.
So, but that may be, you're right, that's a tangent maybe for another discussion
Yeah.
workshop,
Yeah, but
since we've done it for this year.
right. But I do agree to get it done. But I do think that zoning and planning boards should be similar criteria at least.
So the members that live in the township for both boards, do you agree that on both should either own property or business within the corporate
And you
limits.
can have up to 2 of the 7, but you have to have 5 in the city.
Yeah.
limits. I think it's fair for both boards. That's just my, my opinion only.
So you're saying that for the zoning board, as long as you own property within the city limits, you're good.
Or a business.
For 2 of the members.
You could have a business and rent.
I disagree with that.
But you,
I
but
think
you
need
could
to
have
own-
7,
All,
I think you
all
need to
7,
own-
yeah.
All 7 need to own, I mean, this is a quasi judicial
Mhm.
entity.
The
This-
zoning board.
Yes, not planning board, completely
Understand.
different item.
Understand.
And to go back to Amy or whoever said, we need to have folks that when they make a decision, they're bound by it too. And I don't think just owning a business doesn't mean squat. I mean, that can end tomorrow. And if they sell their property, then they're off the zoning board because they're no longer effective. But I think for a quasi judicial board, all members need to be within their jurisdiction of imposition, so to speak.
So to put it another way, you'd say only
In other
property
words, you don't
owners.
live in town, you ain't it.
But if you have property in town, but you're permanent residents in the township, you're qualified to be on the zoning board.
Yeah.
Okay,
I think.
question number 2. If you're on the planning board, would you then allow the same kind of criteria? Would you, because it's not quasi judicial, allow people that own a business in town to be qualified to serve on the planning board?
And I'm not even sure you need to own a business in town. I think there are a lot of people who consider Highlands their community,
Yeah.
who maybe live outside town and want to,
True. Just have 2 outside the city limits.
yeah, just without
A maximum of.
a maximum of 2.
Good.
But let me ask you this.
Mhm.
If you own a business in town, but my primary residence is Florida, do I still get to be on the
No,
zone?
you also have to be in Highlands Township.
Okay,
I
and
think,
live in the Highlands
I think that's
Township
important
and
to
to be, so you got to do both.
You have to be a full-time
Yeah.
resident in the
Correct.
township.
in Highlands Township as one of those 2 people.
So you got your marching orders, you can bring it back to us.
I believe so. And
I
you
would just clarify that to make sure, but I would agree with Michael as well on the zoning board, being, as the planning director for years and trying to find people. There's a lot of training that goes into that zoning board of adjustment. And when they finally get that training and they understand how a board, a meeting is supposed to be carried out, you hate to lose that.
And that it's quasi judicial, it's not just your opinion.
Right,
Yeah.
and you're not meeting as much necessarily as a planning board would need. So I feel like if you've got good members, I think that they should be able, if they're willing, to continue to serve 3-year terms.
Or even, would you change it to like the planning board is now and just reappoint them every year?
Yeah, what does it matter that they have terms if they're willing to serve? Because if they're in for 3 years or in for 5 years, if they get into it in a year and a half and they want out, they're gonna walk
Oh, yeah.
anyway.
We've seen that. So I mean, you can have them on 3
So
or 5 year
it doesn't-
terms
yeah,
and
it
they'll pull
doesn't
out
matter
if they
about
want.
terms. I mean, we're not locking somebody in to coming in the door.
No, but right now, you serve 2, you're out. So I'm saying to be consistent, if they
Well,
want to
and
do
that's-
on
So
the
what you're
zoning
saying
board, so if
is
they
that there's no termination date.
correct.
They
Yes.
can continue forward as long as their desire to serve exists. I agree with that 100%.
Yeah, because
What
we've got a
about the
great
planning
board
board?
that's went through a bunch
And
of
that's the
public
zoning
hearings this
board
year. I
because
mean,
of that.
Yeah.
I'd hate to lose them.
Would the planning board, the same thing, what we're doing now, a reappointment process first of the year?
Yeah, I think the way we've got it works great. I mean, as long as people are willing to serve and we don't have an end date that they serve through, even if we have overlapping years.
But
it's-
are we still talking about keeping the zoning board 3-year terms with no limit of the number of terms?
We're talking about keeping the zoning board at 1 year and.
Well, I would hate to go through a reappointment process with zoning. I don't really like the planning board being reappointed every year. I'd like to see that be 3-year terms. So people can finish the job they started type of thing. Rather than every single year filling out an application. And if you don't get reappointed for whatever reason, I I
I
don't know.
don't,
I like the 3-year terms, but I don't mind not having the
I
limit.
think this is our next workshop.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, it's
Would you
not
bring
gonna
it-
matter
But
till
all
next
these
year.
things need to be hashed
Yeah.
out, just because
Yeah.
we're not gonna do it today.
It seems like
Yep.
y'all could sit down there and bring in some options. some
Yeah.
models.
We'll come back with this policy at the next workshop
All right.
with the updated.
I don't want to come across being in a rush, but I want to get to
Yeah.
everything. So let's move on next to the next item. And that is item 3, table UDO amendments. One is on the commercial building definition. Michael, would you give us a background of where we are, what happened, and why we need to do this?
So if you will remember back in August of 2021, this was brought to the board along with the subdivision road paving, which is the next item on there. Both items were tabled that night, the night that we were trying to get set a public hearing, and then just never brought back to the forefront. The reason the commercial building was brought up is just like a single family dwelling in our definitions. A single family detached dwelling is required to be built to the North Carolina Building Code, Residential Building Code. I think it's a great idea to make commercial buildings that they be built to the North Carolina State Building Code, Commercial Code. And the one instance we've got of that, the examples on Carolina Way, there is a building up there that obviously we didn't require that it be built to commercial code. And we regulated the design of that building that sits up there, but it is on a chassis and wheels. I believe it's got wheels under it, doesn't it?
Yep.
And then the county inspected that as a food truck. So, I mean, it was 2 different scenarios. So I believe putting this in here, you're requiring that any new commercial building coming in the town of Highlands must meet the North Carolina
And let me
Building
add,
Code.
I think we all got a lot of blowback, people saying, why is this happening? And basically it was technicality. Our UDO did not require this conformity to commercial building definitions. So that was allowed on, in a way, on a technicality. And we still are vulnerable to that because we don't have that definition of a commercial building in our UDO. Is that not correct?
That is correct. And I've had somebody, it hadn't been recently, but it's been about 1.5 years ago, asked about possibly doing the same thing, but they never went through with it. The only other thing that you'll see on here, just so you don't think I'm trying to fool you, is there's 2 other red line changes. Those are just
Yeah.
grammatical changes I'd seen right off the top. So this would be the only definition added.
The only thing that I thought about this is the definition of a commercial building.
Mhm.
Should it be a commercial building within our commercial zones? Simply because what about home occupations or things like that? Are they commercial and yet they are allowed in residential, in there would be under residential building code?
Okay, so you would just put commercial buildings within the commercial zoning districts.
Don't you? I'm just trying to get through to what, at some point, we're gonna say, well, what's a commercial use or what's a commercial building? It's a commercial use. It has to be in a commercial building. Does that make it a commercial building? It has to go into commercial building code, which are much different than residential codes.
Yeah. Okay.
Let me speak to that. 20 years ago, when I did my
Oh, you
home
said that.
occupation,
Yeah, right.
I'll speak to that, Amy. When I did my home occupation 20 years ago, I had to pull a building permit, of course, and I had to comply with all the residential construction standards and so forth, and it was basically approved as an outbuilding. But I had to meet all the code for residential. Yeah.
Only question I have, not an attorney by any stretch, but we're talking about the definition of commercial building. If you look up commercial definition, it's where the building is used for profit. But the Bascom, the PAC, the town hall, and all those things are not considered a commercial building, at least the way that I read it. So is there any concern? I mean, it still leaves things open. Can you do a food trailer at the Bascom? Because it's not really meant for profit. It's meant to support the nonprofit. And if it's a commercial venture where, what does it say? Where financial gain is the purpose of the building, Bascom is not, and I'm not picking on them, it's just an example.
No, yeah.
I mean, it's a project I'm very well familiar with, but You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah.
You could add the language.
Public and
define
civic buildings,
the zone,
include those.
including government institutional.
Yeah, it was just,
Yeah.
and I may have short circuited the definition of commercial building, but that's what I read for a North Carolina definition.
What was
By
the
the state.
definition again?
If it's meant for financial gain, but if it's a nonprofit, it's not meant for financial gain. So commercial building, it's not a commercial building by definition. It still has to follow, like the Bascom we still had to follow all the commercial codes. But as far as North Carolina code, but it's a nonprofit, so it's not actually for financial gain. So it's not by definition a commercial building the way I understand it. So I'm just worried about finding you.
And
talk
it's
about
not in a
these-
commercial zoning district. either.
Correct. Well, it's government institution.
Yeah.
Yeah, we
So we
made
could,
that special district so that they could.
Yeah, we
do
did that. You did for that one and for
And the PAC.
the pack. And my only concern is that we just, and I'm not saying anybody would do this, but all I'm saying is we might still have a loophole.
yeah. So I mean, at that point, we can come back with this one and obviously change that definition for commercial buildings and then add one for public and civic buildings in our government and institutional zoning districts. Meeting
That was my
Meeting the
what,
commercial-
meeting the commercial
None
building.
of them have the intent to do it, but,
Would you make it
it's a
meet the
loophole.
commercial building code, the public and civic buildings?
well, they have to anyway.
Okay.
The state's going to require it anyway, so
It's a public building.
it's a
So we
public
could just
building.
add that.
Because it's the public part of it.
Hmm.
So, it can't fall down on you. You have to have a bathroom, all those kinds of
And then the
things.
handicap
And
stuff.
handicap and
Yeah.
all that, because it's a public building.
Yeah, we can add that in there and then bring it back to the regular board meeting if everyone's all
Okay.
right with that,
All right,
with the changes.
okay. Can we move to subdivision road paving requirements? Any discussion about that? To me, that's a very simple thing. If you create a subdivision, you have to pave the road.
So the only reason I'm wanting to change that, as you can see, I mean, the original one, and I think I helped write it a few years ago. But it was hard surface paving such as asphalt or concrete is required for all private single-family residential subdivision streets, requiring a right-of-way designation. They must in all other respects meet the requirements of the town ordinance. I just looked below it at commercial subdivisions, and it's such a simple definition. I don't know why I didn't use it from the start, but it just says all streets in commercial or multifamily subdivisions, whether public or private, shall be paved. So I think if you just go in there and change that to all private streets and residential subdivisions shall be paved, it's a lot simpler. It's got a lot less words and in my opinion, a lot less room for someone to try to get an interpretation.
I just want to make, is commercial subdivision like a subdivision for a mall? And it's like Wright Square is a commercial subdivision? Is that what you're talking about?
I believe so. I can't really think of a commercial subdivision in
It's a
town
residential
besides
subdivision.
Wright.
Pardon?
Residential subdivision.
But an example of a commercial subdivision is that Wright Square. I mean, we consider that
Or Guido, whatever that thing's called.
down across from Dusty's.
I mean, that's considered a shopping center, which
Yeah, but I don't know whether they're individually owned or if they all just rent from one.
It was two, now it's one again.
oh, okay.
Yeah, Guido's was not, but Wright Square is.
But Wright Square is.
If it's individual lots, it would be a subdivision.
I'm just trying to figure out, do we need even actually it says commercial subdivisions?
Well,
I mean, you're not talking
It-
about subdivisions there's residential subdivisions that are commercial developments because a commercial person is doing it.
Yeah.
That's right.
and you've got one, if you'll remember the one up there on South Fourth Street, OEI's is in a commercial zoning district B3, but it's a residential subdivision in there. I don't think it would qualify as a commercial subdivision, but it is in that, a
That's,
commercial
I'm just
zoning
trying to figure
district.
out what the definition of commercial subdivision is. Is it Wright Square? Or the Carolina Way? Is that a commercial subdivision? And we had to, maybe, I'm just.
Yeah, I
trying to
mean,
think through
the more you
the-
think about it, I've never
the-
had to deal with a commercial subdivision here since I've been here, so I don't even know of one that would be considered that. I mean, we consider those shopping centers, that are all individually owned and then one person. I guess Carolina Way would be a subdivision because all those are individually owned up through there.
Do our ordinances specifically pinpoint and address shopping centers?
Yes.
I don't see a shopping center as a commercial subdivision.
Well, if the buildings are separately owned, I think Wright Square is a prime example where you've got buildings that are separately owned. The asphalt is public access.
Yeah.
But the property lines actually go out to Main Street.
But it was developed as a commercial subdivision
Yeah.
and then they were sold as
Exactly.
individual lots.
Yeah. Yeah, that's not an after the fact.
Right.
So I would say that'd be a prime example of
commercial
commercial
subdivision.
subdivision in Highlands. I have a question about the definition of private street. Which we don't have that in these previous definitions. Would we not want to indicate something more definitive, like streets not on the Powell bill map?
Honestly, I mean,
Because
I
they're
don't know
gonna
that.
change. And as that map changes, so would the definition. So would the application.
For the private residential
Instead of just saying
subdivision,
private, instead of saying all private streets, say all streets not on the Powell bill. Map. Which are all private streets. Is that not correct?
Yeah, they're either belong to
They're either private or
state
they
or-
belong.
the state or municipal.
I can make that change if that's,
We'll think about it.
if that's
Yeah,
the.
just, cogitate on that one.
All right, we're getting close to the 7 o'clock hour and I wanted to go over the last item, weekend construction work regulations. We talked about this at our last workshop in November. I know Michael and Josh have been working on that. We found some, if you would, maybe some contradictory, problematic languages. Would you go over that, Michael, and explain what y'all done?
So if you'll remember last time we were here, or last workshop we had, we talked about under section 8-16 exemptions. Item number 10 under there, it's non-commercial lawnmowers and agriculture equipments operated in working hours and only if operated in accordance with manufacturer specifications and with all standard noise reducing equipment in place and in proper condition. Well, when you turn back to working hours, the definition of working hours is Monday through Friday, 7:30 a.m. to 6 p.m. So technically, people would not be exempt, non-commercial, like homeowners would not be exempt to operate their lawnmowers and agriculture equipment on the weekends. So to come up with a solution for that, we've decided to add a definition for weekend working hours. And obviously, this would be for Saturdays and Sundays. I just threw 9 to 4 and 12 to 4 in there. This is obviously flexible and at the board's decision on what you would like to see for those hours. But I believe adding that and then changing that exemption to non-commercial lawnmowers and agricultural equipment operated during working hours and weekend working hours, and only if operated in accordance with manufacturer specifications, so on and so forth. That was the first change we had. And then going into the second one was under number 16 on that same 8-16 exemptions was refuse collection, vehicles operating during working hours. So they would not be exempt from the noise ordinance. And I believe Josh told me that our trash guys do pick up trash on the weekends. So I believe a simple fix and would be changing that to daytime hours. And daytime hours does not set Monday through Friday. It's any day. And according to this definition, it's 7 a.m. to 10 p.m. That could be something that we added to if you would like to change those hours as well. I just think that would cover our trash collection guys that had to work whether Monday or Sunday.
Rather than have a set time, a stopping time, 10 p.m., 4 p.m. on weekends. Why not have a start time of whatever you want it to be? If it's 7 a.m. till dusk, which allows some of us that work 6 days a week to at least go home on Saturday afternoon and mow the yard past 4 o'clock. And that would also reflect the season. So if it gets dark at 9 o'clock.
And dusk means the sun is gone down. That's it.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah.
Or something like that.
Just
depending
before
on
sunset.
when you got
Sunset's
glasses.
definable.
Yeah.
Sunset would be definable. I mean, you know an exact time for sunset every day.
Yeah.
I'm just saying that could be an option instead of dusk.
Yeah, because dusk is a
Yeah.
nebulous term.
Yeah.
I had one question too. This non-commercial lawnmowers and agricultural equipment. You're defining the equipment as either commercial or non-commercial. Because shouldn't it be non-commercial use of lawnmowers and agricultural equipment? Yeah, you could, I could take my tractor up there. Or I was a lawn person, and as long as I bought it down there at Lowe's, like everybody else can buy it, it's not commercial, it's a residential.
But does it become commercial because it's for profit? You're paying somebody to do it?
I don't know.
Does that go back to that
But
definition?
that's what I'm
about the
saying,
building?
if it's non-commercial use. See,
Instead of the piece of
instead
equipment.
of the piece of
Yeah.
equipment.
Yeah, that's a good point.
I could get that noted.
Yeah, I can make that change, no problem.
So what we'll do, we'll have Michael bring back all of these changes.
Now,
Any other questions of Michael?
just a quick one from me to the board. Saturday, Sunday, strike the 9 a.m., 4 p.m. and 12 p.m., 4 p.m. How do you want me to say that? I know he said till sunset, which is definable.
Well, I don't have a problem with start times.
Okay.
I don't
Yeah.
think you want to go sun up,
No.
sunset.
Not me.
Would you like to see 9 a.m. with that?
That's
9
fine.
a.m. till sunset or
Well,
noon?
are you talking commercial or non-commercial?
It would be, so nothing else would change except that non-commercial use of agricultural equipment. You still couldn't have builders working on the weekends, nothing like that.
But you can't mow your lawn or blow your leaves
Until 9 o'clock
till 12 on Sunday.
and 12 on Sunday, yeah. What do y'all want to do?
I don't know, we'll think about that one.
Okay, so I can make some of the changes to that and then bring it back.
Okay.
And then at that point, you can just direct us what the start date and then the end date. And I can bring that back and we'll go from there.
Okay. All right, we're at the end of the hour. Do I have a motion for us to adjourn?
Second.
Second, all in favor?
Right.
Thank you. We're adjourned and we'll take just a few minutes